Well, good morning. I'm Judge Camille Dubose, and I was elected as judge of the 38th District Court in 2008. I preside over felony, criminal, civil, and family law dockets in Uvalde and Real counties. Before being elected, I served 12 years as the associate judge of the Child Protection Court of South Texas. I'm also a former assistant district attorney for the 38th Judicial District and a former Bexar County prosecutor. I also started a post-adjudication mental health court program for people who are on probation for felony offenses. My mental health court has a grant-funded mental health caseworker, and one of the most frequent questions I get asked about my court is, how did you get that grant? That's why I'm so excited to introduce our first session today, which is tailored to anyone who wants to secure funding for initiatives at the intersection of mental health and the justice system. This grant writing workshop will give you a deeper understanding of the grant procurement process, from identifying state and federal funding opportunities to crafting persuasive proposals. And as you all know, we need that grant money in order to get these courts up and running. So this is really important. We have a fabulous group of speakers. Our group of experts on this topic include Anita Carpenter, a consultant at the Office for Victims of Crime Training and Technical Assistance Center, Dr. Kristen Devall, a co-director for the National Drug Court Resource Center, Dr. Christine Lanier, also a co-director for the National Drug Court Resource Center. It's early. And Alyssa Smith, the Justice Programs Administrator for the Texas Office of the Governor. Remember, we're saving time by only giving you brief introductions to our speakers, so please check out their full biographies and accomplishments on the Summit website. Welcome, panelists.
She's supposed to be first. Okay.
All right, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us early. My name is Kristen Devall, and as Judge said, one of the co-directors of the National Treatment Court Resource Center. And so while some of you might not be affiliated with treatment courts per se, what we're going to talk about in terms of the process of approaching grant writing is really is the same no matter where you are within the criminal justice system or juvenile child welfare system. So a little disclaimer, the National Treatment Court Resource Center is funded by the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and so we have this disclaimer that none of our opinions or the information that we will share with you today necessarily represents the Department of Justice or the Bureau of Justice Assistance. So I won't go into too much detail, but if you haven't checked out, if you're not familiar with the National Treatment Court Resource Center, we would encourage you to check out the website. And it's listed here. It's also in the slides that you have available, but it's ntcrc.org. Wealth of information related to both grant writing and also program-specific information that cuts across, again, the intersection of mental health and substance use. Specifically, there are some maps that have some data that might be relevant to your grant writing efforts or just better understanding your communities. So please check that out. Also, feel free to email us, or we can chat after this session to tell you more about what's available. So the grant writing process, how many of you, just a quick show of hands, have written a grant or been a part of a grant writing team in the past? Okay, so we have some seasoned folks. I suspect the rest of you are new. And so again, what we've done here is we're going to talk a little bit about the process of applying for grant funding. And so Christy and I do a training on grant writing. It's actually a 3-hour workshop. So we're going to talk about this in 20 minutes. So again, additional information. But we've broken this portion of the presentation into essentially 3 sections. The first is planning activities. So these are what you can be doing right now, even though you might not have identified a solicitation that you want to pursue. What are some of the activities that you and your team can undertake right now to get you prepared for when that solicitation becomes available? The second is, once that solicitation is available, what do you do next? And then the third section that Christy's going to talk about is, okay, how do you begin writing that project narrative? So that's kind of the structure for this. So in terms of planning activities, again, what you can be doing right now are looking at whatever it is that you're thinking you want to fund within your program, whether that's a new program, maybe you want to start something new, or you have a program and you want to expand or enhance that. So look at solicitations that might have come out in the past. Certainly the state has some solicitations that Alyssa's going to talk more about, but there are also federal and foundation funding opportunities for your work. So check those out. See who the applicant needs to be. So is that the county? Is that a program? Is that a nonprofit? I know we have some folks representing nonprofits in the audience. So see who the applicant needs to be. Because you might need to formulate partnerships with other community entities in order to be able to apply. So start having those conversations. You also might need authorization from someone in your county to apply. So for example, county commissioners, city council, you might need the chief judge's approval. So have those conversations and let them know that you're thinking about applying for grant writing and what is that process within your local jurisdiction. And then finally, pay attention to when are the solicitations, when do they come out annually? A lot of times grants are on a cycle that repeat year after year. And so I know Alyssa's going to talk about the state solicitation out of her office. Also, the federal government has a grant cycle that repeats itself every year. And so pay attention to that and how long you have from the time that solicitation is released to when it is due. Sometimes that's 60 days, sometimes that's 90 days, but you just need to know how much time do you have once that's released. Also, how many of you have heard of a logic model for your program? Some of you may have that, but this is a really good tool. This essentially outlines a bird's eye view of your program. What is it that participants are engaging in? What are the resources that you have currently? What are the outputs of those activities? What are the outcomes? What's the change that you want to see through your program? And then what are the goals? So a really good activity to be undertaking during your planning, the planning time, is to outline that and look at some of your program data to see, what do we look like currently and where can we enhance, expand what it is that we're doing. So kind of looking at that logic model, if you have an evaluator or a research partner that you're working with, that individual can help you either create a logic model or walk through that activity. In addition, again, you can review some of the program or the court data. I know some of you yesterday that were in the session talked about some of the challenges associated with getting data within your local jurisdiction. So having those conversations with the jail or child welfare or whomever, the court, to determine kind of what is the status quo and what do we need to do. You should also engage in conversations with your team. So who on the team are you working with, either in your office or with other community partners that may be helping you to serve individuals within your jurisdictions? So have conversations with them about what do they see as unmet need or emerging trends, again, that you want to address and you need funding to support those efforts. And then also, at the same time, be thinking about what is it that you need in order to fulfill those needs. So do you need to hire personnel? That's one conversation. Or do you need money to support programming for some maybe evidence-based practices? Do you need money for drug testing? Do you need supplies? What is it that you need? And start making a list of all of the things and associated costs potentially that will help you get started with that grant process. All right, so that's planning, right? You're going to identify what it is that you need so that when the solicitation comes out, you have a really good sense of where do we go from here. Once the solicitation comes out, the first thing that you need to do is read that solicitation really carefully. Read it one time, read it 2 times, read it 3 times, and really make note of who can apply and what are the specific items that you need to address within that project narrative, okay? The instructions on any grant application or grant solicitation will be very specific about the information that you need to include in your proposal, along with any additional attachments. So probably the number one kind of tip that we tell folks that are seeking grant funding is follow instructions, right? So do exactly what the funder is asking. Also, again, you've had those conversations during the planning time frame. So really determining what is the issue and what exactly are we going to go after in terms of funding. What will the grant support, and therefore, what are we going to include in our application? Do you need community partners? That's the time to then start asking for those letters of support. A lot of times funders want to see that those community partners have committed to the project. They want to see that. Also, what evidence-based practices are you going to utilize? So what activities and what do you need money to support? Funders want to know that those are quality services that are being delivered to individuals. And then also thinking about the specific elements of the program that will be supported with these grant funds. So paying attention to what is it? Are you going to enhance the capacity of your program to provide services? Are you going to increase personnel on the team to address need? What exactly are you going to be doing? Within this process, you're also going to create an outline of the solicitation. So again, paying attention to what exactly do you need to address within the proposal, follow instructions, address all of the bullet points that the funder is asking you to address. Also pay attention to the dollar amount. So what is the ceiling what is the maximum dollar amount that you can apply for? You certainly can't go over that, but a lot of times people think, I don't need $500,000, I only need $200,000. Should I apply? Absolutely. Ask for what you need, but just know that you can't go over that maximum dollar amount that's listed in the solicitation. And also pay attention to the grant period. Is this a 1-year, a 3-year, a 5-year grant period? And how many people can you realistically serve within that time frame? Funders will hold you to, for the most part, the number of individuals that you say you're going to serve, so make sure that that's realistic in the time frame and given the dollar amount and what you're asking for funding for. And then the final activity during this, again, preparation stage, once the solicitation has come out, is create a to-do list. And so Christy and I, when we write grants, this is one of the first activities that we do, is make a to-do list. What are all of the things that we need to include in that grant application? We also make note of who do we need information from, letters of support, who do we need permission, all of those things, as well as who is going to help us gather all of these documents. So we assign tasks. We certainly ask for individuals to help us gather those letters of support, circulate that memorandum of understanding, all of that. And then also designate one person to be the organizer of all of those documents. Staying organized is really one key element to this process that can't be overstated. So with that, I will turn it over to Christy, who's going to talk about how do you actually write the project narrative.
Thank you, Kristen. Good morning. I am Christina, the other co-director of the National Treatment Court Resource Center. We're happy to be here. So as Kristen said, when we do this presentation, it's usually 3 hours. And one of the things that we really pride ourselves on is giving you practical advice for actually writing the proposal. And so that's what I'm going to touch on as I go through these various sections of the proposal, but keeping in mind there's definitely more nitty-gritty details that you can dig into when you're doing these. So if you've never written a grant before, just like most things, it's separated into various sections. So what I'm going to talk about today is various headings of those sections that are from the Bureau of Justice Assistance grant funding. Now, with that said, all grants have some form of these headings or sections. It might be called something different, but they're asking for the same information, okay? So there's 4 sections that we're going to talk about. There's the description of the issue, There's the project implementation, capabilities and competencies, and then data collection. There's also an abstract, there's also a budget. We're not going to have time to talk about those two things, but we're going to talk about those 4 primary sections, okay? So the first one is the description of the issue. Sorry, I'm used to walking around when I talk, so I'm going to have to move my feet around up here. So the description of the issue, what we always say when you're writing a grant is you're telling a story. You have to convince the person reviewing that grant proposal that you need this money because you're going to address some issue in your community or jurisdiction. So there's a gap in services, there's an increase in a particular, perhaps drugs of use, and you're trying to address that issue. The description of the issue is the first thing, if they've read the abstract and they want to keep going, they're going to read the description of the issue. That's the first thing they're going to read. So here, you really want to capture their attention. And there's a couple of ways to do that. As we say here, you want to be clear, concise, and convincing. We always say the 3 C's. You want to be clear, concise, and convincing. How do you do that? You have to demonstrate that there is a need in your community that you need to address. Using data as evidence is very important. All of the funders are going to ask you to provide data. So we've just put some examples of various types of data that you might use. So substance use data, if you can get local arrest data, as we talked about yesterday in our session, sometimes that local data can be a little hard to get. If you have program data, so you already have a program in place and you're looking to expand that program. So you might use the data. Kristen and I work with a number of reentry programs. We're in Wilmington, North Carolina. We work with a number of reentry programs that have been around for a while. So when we go to apply for a grant, we use the data from the program to make the case for whatever we're looking for to enhance, okay? So if you already have that data, you need to be using that data in your description of the issue. If you don't have that data, because it's a new program, that's okay. We've given you some other sources that you can use. So you can use court data, especially you all, being that you're in the courts. You can use court data, and then also you might have to use census data. So certain applications ask for a demographic profile of your target population. That phrase, they love that phrase in grant proposals. Demographic profile of your target population, okay? You might have to get that from the census, some of that information. One of the things that you must do when you're writing this description of the issue, and this is one of those, again, sort of practical advice, practical remember, is cite your data sources. That is a huge piece of it because they want to ensure that the data you're providing is useful. So let me give you an example. One of the reentry programs that we work with, whenever we write a grant, we always have to have a baseline recidivism rate. A baseline recidivism rate. So in our county, our jail data is almost non-existent. We can get demographics, that's about it. So we don't have the opportunity to get data from the jail on recidivism. So what we have to do is find the next best thing. So the next best thing is the people in this program are on probation. Luckily, the state of North Carolina does it's about every 2 years, they do a report on post-released supervision individuals or parole and probation. And they do a really actually good report on those individuals that have been put on probation. They do failures on probation, and they do recidivism among probationers. So we're able to use that data as our baseline recidivism rate. So what we say in the grant proposal is local recidivism data is not available. However, using this as our source, the baseline recidivism rate for this population is, and that's what we're going to use. As long as you have, for the most part, a solid, something you can cite, a solid source that's usually acceptable. One other quick note, we talked about this yesterday. If the local data, if it's asking for specific local data and it's not available, you need to say that in your description of the issue. Because that shows that you tried to get, as Kristen said, you followed directions, okay? You have to follow directions. Within this description of the issue, you also want to provide, maybe, oh, there it is. This is really strange. I'm sorry. I'm not used to being up on a podium. You also need to provide research and literature to support that. You might say, well, I'm not a researcher. That's okay. There are places out there that you can get that type of information. Our website is one of them, which we've listed here. You probably have heard of Google Scholar. There are journals you may have heard of called open access journals. That luckily we're moving towards that much more in academia, which means that they're not behind a paywall. You don't have to have a subscription. Many of you probably have access to a local law library, I would think. So you can use those entities as resources to support this information that you're putting in. And you're going to use that data, you're going to use that literature and that research later on in the proposal as well. So when you're talking about things like evidence-based practices, you're going to have to demonstrate that whatever you're using moral recognition therapy, MRT, with your population. You're going to need to put some research in there that says it's okay to use this with this population. So being able to find research that supports these things is really important. I will say on our website, I think that's backwards, ntcrc.org, we have a database of publication searches. We also have some maps on our website that has a ton of data, census data, overdose data, crime rate data, all by state and most of it by county. So just as a side, I would show you, but we don't have time. All right, so our description of the issue, we've convinced the reviewer that there's a problem and that this data shows us that there's a problem. And now what we're going to do is talk about how are we going to address that problem. So this is project design and implementation. Again, it may be called something else in a proposal, but this is the meat of your what we call project narrative. This is the meat of that. This usually has, has the highest percentage when it comes to your scoring rubric. This is where you're going to get the most points. So you really need to pay attention when you're writing this project design and implementation. So you're telling your story, you've laid out the problem, now this is how you're going to address it. Again, practical advice here. Linking your proposal to the solicitation goals and the mission of the funding agency. What does that mean? Every solicitation will have goals and objectives related to it, okay? The overarching goal of this solicitation is this. Here are the objectives related to this solicitation. You need to know what those are, and you need to put them in your project design and implementation, because that is how you're going to demonstrate you followed directions. You've read the proposal, okay? So you want to make sure that you're linking. Kristen and I always use the phrase, we like to sprinkle the words of the solicitation into our project narrative. So it is a matter of reading that project narrative very carefully and going back and saying, okay, here's what they're interested in. They're interested in adults with co-occurring disorder. We want to make sure that adults with co-occurring disorder are what we talk about in this project design and implementation. Clearly describing what you are proposing to do. Now, Kristen and I have been writing grants for 15 years. Have we gotten all the grants that we've applied for? Yeah, right. Absolutely not, right? I don't want to burst your bubble, but you apply for a lot of grants and you only get a couple, but it's okay. It's practice. But one of the things you usually get is feedback. And so we take that feedback and we use it the next time. And one of the things that we have learned over the years is making sure that it's very clear what you're proposing to do. There are bullet points in each solicitation, okay? In those bullet points, so one bullet point might say, describe your goals and objectives. We literally make an outline, as Kristen said, of the RFP, and we put those bullet points in a Word document. and then we go and we answer them. Now, you don't leave the bullet points in the application, but we go and we answer them. Answer them in the order that they appear, answer them fully. Don't combine them. Again, we talked about this yesterday. This was a lesson learned for us. We're academics, right? We're like, let's pontificate on reentry programs. No, they want it clear, concise. So we would take bullet 1 and bullet 5 and combine them into one answer. No, they made those bullet points for a reason. Answer the bullet points in the order that they appear, okay? Be clear. This is how you can make sure that you're clear. This thing does not like me. And I know this seems sort of like a duh moment, but make sure that it's realistic, logical, and feasible. And why we say that is you want to make sure that what you're proposing, especially perhaps what you're putting in your budget, is reflected in your project design and implementation. So you're not going to say we're going to serve 500 people. I used this as an example yesterday. We're not going to serve 500 people with $10,000. That's not feasible, okay? You want to be very clear as to what you're doing to address that statement of the issue. Oh, one other quick thing. When you're doing the bullet points, don't say as mentioned above. Like, did y'all know y'all are repeating yourselves? Don't do that, okay? They know they're repeating themselves. So just, again, answer each of the bullet points. All right, so you've mentioned what you're doing. You've talked about how you're going to address that problem in detail. We always say the reviewer should have no questions after they read your project design and implementation. Going back to what Kristen said about the logic model, that's a good place to start. Hey, what do we say we're doing? And then how are we going to address the issue? Capabilities and competencies, probably pretty self-explanatory. This is the who. Who is going to implement what you just described? See, there's a logical order here, okay? This is the skills, the expertise. You talk about your team. A lot of grants, some grants have requirements for what they call key personnel. So you might have to have a project director, that's half-time. You might have to have an evaluator, that's 20% of the time. There's very specific requirements in some proposals, so you need to pay attention to that. If you are providing anything that's listed in your budget, so we work with a program, they provide 8 weeks of housing for their participants. So in this capabilities and competencies, we talk about all of the housing partners that they're working with. Just a sentence. And one other thing we do, this is just a side, is we bold the names of each of the partners so that they know that each of those partners, there's a letter of support available for that partner. If you're working with treatment, making sure if you're doing a treatment grant, a lot of times they have to have certain accreditations, and you need to make sure that you have all of that and you have that written. Also in the capabilities and competencies, you're going to talk about the ability to operate and handle the fiscal component. So sometimes it will ask, demonstrate your organization's capabilities or history of fiscal, handling the fiscal part of grants, okay? So it can be a lot of different things. The roles and responsibilities of all key personnel. Again, if they're listed in the budget, they need to be in capabilities and competencies. I cannot stress that enough, okay? If it's listed in the budget, it needs to be in capabilities and competencies. So in project design and implementation, if you're offering transportation and it's in the budget, you better talk about it in the project design and implementation. Because they will say, not that we know this from experience, they will say, there's no discussion of transportation in your project narrative. Whoops, missed it. Okay, so again, learn from our mistakes, I suppose. You will have to have, in most grants, some sort of memorandum of understanding or memorandum of agreement. Make sure that this is just, again, a practical advice. Make sure you start these things early. because they can take a lot of time. One of the reentry programs we work with, I think one of the MOUs needed 15 different signatures because it's a community-based program. So all the community partners had to sign it. That takes a while. We want to make sure that that's clear. Okay. The last section, so you've talked about who's going to do the things. Now you have to demonstrate, well, how are we going to know it's working? And Kristen and I do a whole lot of program evaluation. We teach program evaluation. And so this is probably our favorite part of the grant proposal, is the data collection and evaluation of the program. So all grant proposals are going to have some sort of required measurement that you have to do, okay? In BJA, it's called the Performance Measurement Tool, the PMT. In SAMHSA, it's called the GIPRA. Everybody has one. In the Texas State app, what is it called?
It's an e-grant.
It's an e-grants. See, aren't you glad we have her? Okay, for the state application. So they're all going to have it. Now, one of the key things, and sometimes people do confuse this, and they say this in the proposals, in the solicitations, you don't have to collect data and put it into your proposal. You have to just demonstrate that you have the capacity to collect the required measures. Okay, so make sure that's understood. You also want to talk about the process and the plan for collecting that information. I'm not going to read all of these, but these are some of the questions that you want to answer when you're writing this up. It's very important that you are clear. Again, lesson learned for us. We wrote a proposal. It involved a lot of partners. 3 different agencies were dealing with the data piece. One of the reviewers said it was unclear the role that probation and parole played in the data collection process. We didn't get that grant, not that it was just for that reason, but okay. So for us, it was like, whoops, we needed to make that clearer. So being very clear. Now with all of this said, guess what? In SAMHSA, you get 10 single-spaced pages to put all this information. Good luck. Most BJA applications, it's 20 double-spaced pages to put all this information. Sometimes 30. There have been a few. They've gotten shorter over the years, I will say that. They've gone down. What?
I have one that's 12.
She has one in Texas that's 12. More than SAMHSA, less than BJA. So another practical kind of suggestion, when we start writing, we just write. We write and we write and we write. It might be a SAMHSA grant, we need 10 pages. We might have 12, 13, okay? Then we go back and we cut. Get it all on paper, then you can go back and cut, okay? You don't listen to what she reviews grants, don't listen to me. Take, one more thing, use ampersands and take off widow orphan control. I'm just saying. It gives you a little bit more space. Those are my practical advice when you're writing a proposal. Gives you a little bit more space. Most grants require that you have a timeline. Again, it can vary based on the proposal that you're filling out. So this is where you're going to usually put your objectives, your goals, and obviously the timeline that those things are going to happen. So pay attention to things in the proposal, like you have a 6-month planning period, or you have a 1-year planning period. BJA is really big on planning periods, and you have to complete what's called a planning and implementation guide. That's very long, okay? So pay attention to those details, because in your grant proposal, you want to demonstrate that, again, you follow directions. In your timeline, if you're saying enroll participants month 1, no, you have a 6-month planning period. Your planning and implementation guide has to be approved. All of those things, okay? So really pay attention to details. All right. Tell your story. I've said that a couple of times. Make it clear what you're interested in. If you're doing treatment courts, talk about your participants if you have some already. Talk about the issues in your community. We talked yesterday a little bit, if you're looking to enhance or expand a recovery court, maybe what you want to do is talk about, you have a waiting list of 20 people and you need another case manager. So that's, you want to include that information. Yes, there are places where there will be repetition. Answer the bullet points in the order that they appear. That's all I can just tell you over and over again. Definitely outlining the steps. We write grants for other people. We also write a grant for us, obviously, because we're grant funded, but we write grants for other people. And we are very big on the to-do list that Kristen mentioned, where we allocate responsibility. So the agency is responsible for these things. Kristen and I are responsible for these things. It's extremely helpful. Be sure to answer all the bullet points. In the 3-hour workshop, we say this about 75 times. Use data to support your research, support funding, support evidence-based practices. That's really important to demonstrate, especially with SAMHSA, if you're using treatment that's evidence-based and you're using cognitive behavioral therapy for a particular population, your target population, you need to be really clear about who that is and why it's okay to use this method with this population, okay? And it really doesn't like me. Stay organized. Yeah, do that, stay organized, okay? So thank you very much. This is us. I know it doesn't, I promise you, these aren't AI generated. It's actually us. So feel free to email us if you have questions about grants. We love talking about grants. We're nerds. And so definitely send us an email if you have any questions about grant writing. We have a ton of resources on our website specifically for grant writing. And then just some helpful resources where you can get information about grant writing. Yeah. And I will turn it over. Good luck with this. Maybe it's me. Oh.
All right, good morning, everyone. So for the sake of hoping that we have time for questions, I'm going to try to be a little brief, but I just want to kind of give an overview of the Governor's Public Safety Office and kind of what we do, and then go into talking about our application process and give a quick overview of the Specialty Courts Grant Program. For those of you who may not be involved in a specialty court, don't leave, because I'm going to try to generalize some things and kind of how that can apply to other grant programs that we have. So the Public Safety Office is the designated state administering agency for appropriated funds, both state and federal, for criminal justice and homeland security grants awarded to Texas. So PSO is composed of the Victim Services Team, Justice Programs, Homeland Security, Terrorism Preparedness, Border Security, Crime Stoppers, Child Sex Trafficking Team, Sexual Assault Survivors Task Force, and the Grant Administration Division. So the Grant Administration Division, they don't actually have any grant programs with them. They just oversee our e-grant system, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And they also do kind of all of the background work in setting up our federal accounts, our state accounts, and kind of deal with all of the money transactions and payments. Oh, and I do want to mention that I am on the Justice Programs team. I oversee all of the grants that flow through that team, but all of the other teams that I mentioned do have grant programs. So if you deal with any kind of services in the other areas, I would suggest that you go to the eGrants website and kind of take a look at their grant programs as well. So we receive more than 2,000 individual applications on an annual basis. For the 2022-2023 biennium, we funded over 4,000 individual grants for a total of a little bit over $1 billion. So a lot of money flows through our office. So if you need a grant, please come to us. We have a lot of money and we would love to award it to you. All applications go through an internal multi-layer review process, and most of our applications receive an external peer review. So as you'll see here, this is a typical grant cycle for most of our grant programs. Some of the grant programs on our Borders team kind of have a slightly different grant cycle, but for the most part, all of our solicitations will open in December. This year, we are aiming for December 11th, and then they'll close in February of 2024. And then starting in March of 2024, we'll begin our grant review process. And then in August, we'll finalize all of our budgets, make our fund plans and different things like that, and then aim to release awards in September and October of next year. So as I mentioned, our eGrants website is our online grants management portal. So if you are interested in applying for a grant through our office, I would suggest that you go ahead and register and create a user account. That way you can just kind of get familiar with our eGrants website, how it works, where information is located. Some forms, guides, FAQs, instructional videos, they're all located in eGrants. So as I mentioned, on the Justice Programs team, I oversee about 18 different grant programs. Here's just kind of a slight overview of the different issue areas that I have grant programs for. Oh, there we go. And so as I mentioned, today I'm just going to go over the specialty courts specifically, but I will kind of generalize how different information that you can find on the funding announcements, also called RFAs, how that will apply to other programs. There we go. So on each funding announcement, they'll state the purpose for the grant program, key information in regards to the program, and then kind of eligible costs or activities. So for the purpose of the Specialty Courts Grant Program, it provides funding assistance for specialty court programs as defined in chapters 121 through 130 of the Texas Government Code. So for key information, all of our funding solicitations are going to state how long the grant period should be. And so for most of them, they're going to be a 12-month project period. They'll also state the start date, the earliest start date. So please make sure when you create your application, don't put a start date that is before that. Because a lot of times when you do that, that kind of just lets us know that you didn't read the RFA. So make sure that, like Kristen said, read it and apply it. They will also always list a minimum request amount. So please make sure if there is a minimum amount listed that you do not go below that. If you do, for example, for this one, the minimum is $10,000. If you submit an application for even $9,000, it will be ineligible. Same thing for the maximum amount. If there's a maximum amount listed, please do not go over that. For specialty courts, we do not have a maximum anymore. Thank you to HB 1256 for the use of the mixed beverage tax dollars. We have a lot of funds, so apply for what you need. And then all eligible applications for this specific fund source are reviewed and scored by the Specialty Court Advisory Council. And then there are lists of the eligible specialty court programs in Texas. So also on the funding announcements, there will be a section that talks about the program-specific requirements for that specific grant program. For the specialty courts, different things that it lists are in regards to you must use the Texas risk assessment system. So that assessment on each participant that's enrolled during the project period. For juvenile courts, that's going to be the PACT risk assessment. And then all specialty courts must meet all registration requirements as listed on the screen here. So if you are creating a specialty court, you need to make sure that you are kind of going through the process of meeting all of these requirements, and then also being in touch with OCA. So when you're registering to be a specialty court, that will all go through the Office of Court Administration. And then we also have a new requirement that all specialty courts applying for funding are required to complete the BEST assessment, which is the Best Practices Self-Assessment Tool. So the Specialty Courts Advisory Council found that when they're reviewing applications, that this is a very helpful tool for them to kind of see where courts are in meeting the key components. And then all adult courts must have implemented the NADCP Adult Drug Court Best Practice Standards, and then same for the family drug courts. There we go. So as I mentioned, the addition of the mixed beverage gross receipts and sales tax, though that implementation of that revenue has been a huge part in increasing the amount of specialty court funds. Over the course of fiscal year 2022, we saw a little under 14 million into the specialty courts account. And so for fiscal year 2023, we're kind of trending right above that. So we're kind of expecting to see, excuse me, about 15 million. So here's some resources here for the Specialty Courts Grant Program. Again, utilizing the funding announcement, it has a lot of useful information on it. Like Kristen and Christina was saying, read it and apply it. You can also go to chapters 121 through 130 of the Government Code. The essential characteristics per court program are listed there as well. And then again, the Specialty Courts Resource Center, they are literally the TTA provider for all specialty courts in Texas. So if you have a question on training, funding, anything like that, please go see them. There is also on their website, they have a grant writing webinar, which Kristen and Christina created, so it's great. So please also go see that. It literally walks you through how to apply and kind of the planning process and things like that they mentioned. There's also a preparing your project narrative checklist there, so check that out as well. And then as I mentioned, the Office of Court Administration, they're a good resource, especially if you're needing to establish a specialty court. You'll want to reach out to them. Anita, she works there. You'll deal with her when you're registering your specialty court. And then the eGrants user guide to creating an application, that link is available in the eGrants website, and it literally will walk you through how to create an application in eGrants. It has screenshots, it has circled items on there, it has tips and tricks, so definitely you can use that as a guide to creating any application. And here's my contact information. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and I would love to answer your questions. Oh,
I have no slides.
I don't know what that was. Now I'll turn it over to Anita.
We'll just leave up your contact information. That'll be great. All right, so I too am a hopeless grant goober nerd, so self-proclaimed. But I just want to tell you, originally I wanted to be a lawyer, public defender, and got the best advice. This was not my original path. I was going down the road to become a public defender, and I was working as a pretrial release counselor in Tennessee. Judge called me up to the bench. She was like, "You are on the wrong side." She goes, you are not cut out for pretrial release. So she said, "You need to be working for victims." And so I was like, okay. So I switched my path, and that put me down a road working in victim services for, I don't know, roughly about 25 years. And part of that, then I became administrative and took on the path of writing grants. And so I've been writing grants for the past 30 years, and for the past 20 years, I've been doing grant reviews at the federal level. So I'm here today representing the Office for Victims of Crime Training and Technical Assistance Center and the Bureau of Justice Assistance Training and Technical Assistance Center, grant consultant, grant writer kind of perspective. And I also come to you with reviews. So as I was listening to Christina and Kristen and Alyssa's information, I was like, okay, so what are the last few minutes of time that I'm going to share with you? So you didn't get slides from me, but I have all these notes that I was like, okay, I need to mention this and this. But the other thing I wanted to tell you is on your resource center and then back on your website and then in the back on the staff table, I put, and then they'll be in the other exhibit hall, there's the BJA TTAC informational brochure, and I put together, because as we talk about all of this, most of the time people are like, I need to find out where I can find grants. And so I put together a little handout. It's also on the website, but it is a basic compilation. It is certainly not all-inclusive, comprehensive, but it is a lot of the Bureau of Justice Assistance and SAMHSA funding that is related to courts. So the majority of the funding I think that you're going to find is found within Bureau of Justice Assistance and SAMHSA. And so that's back there if you want that information. But here are my takeaways for you in the time that I have remaining. All right, so things that are important to know. As you're on the hunt for grants, looking at, and I'm speaking to you from a federal agency, from a federal search web perspective, right? And I can touch on private foundations too, but there's your great resource for all your state funding and any federal funding that passes through the state. So VAWA funding, STOP, JAG funding, Alyssa's your gal. So, but my recommendation when you're on the hunt for federal dollars is to go to the agency's website. Go to the Bureau of Justice Assistance, go to the Office on Violence Against Women or Office for Victims of Crime or SAMHSA's website and look at their funding opportunities. They are going to lay out past funding and prospective or current funding opportunities. Please look at those past funding opportunities. The federal fiscal year is October through September. The majority of the solicitations, I say, come out between February and May. And so you can look at past year's solicitations because absolutely what they were telling you is plan, prepare, be ready, because they're not just I can't just sit down and write one in a day. It takes time, planning, and a lot of heads at the table. So look at those past solicitations. You can go ahead and start writing based upon information in that past solicitation. Then when the new solicitation comes out, because I guarantee you, they only give you maybe 4 weeks, 6 weeks at the most to write it and get it submitted, which is not a lot of time when you're adding that to your current workload. So if you're looking at that past solicitation, you write your proposal based upon that past solicitation. When the new solicitation comes out, you're reading that to see if there have been any changes, updates, any priorities or preferences that have changed, making sure it's still eligible, that you still fit within the purpose area, and then you're ready to submit. So look at those past solicitations as a guide for you. The other thing I recommended, if anybody was in the Q&A yesterday, some of the federal agencies will give you examples of past successful applications. So if you're looking at the Bureau of Justice Assistance website for solicitations, and you say, gosh, I really like this community initiative or Justice and Mental Health Collaborative, look and see, because they've got samples on there of what they have found to be successful. So you want to read that. I pulled this one just to read on the plane. It tells you how much of a grant goober I am. But I was looking at it because I was like, I wonder what's really important to them in this solicitation. You know, and when they were talking about data, it stood out to me because I was reading this and I said, you know, I acknowledge that local data is sometimes a challenge, especially when you're trying to start a new program. But this application that was successful on BJA's website gives the national data, it cites the source, and then it correlates it to the local condition. So that you're saying, I may not have all of the data, but this is what I know, and this is why I know it's important in my community. Draw that connection, and exactly what Kristen and Christina were saying, tell your story. From a reviewer's perspective, and I review a lot of federal grants, I can tell you, we're not supposed to compare them, but you're sitting there in a week's time having to review around 10 to 15 applications for the same solicitation on your panel. And you kind of do. I mean, don't tell them I said that. But you do. You look at something because you want something that stands out and tells the story. I don't really care if you don't have a lot of data. I have a lot of respect for rural programs that may not rise to the level of Austin population, but it's still a problem for them. And they're saying, we're a population of 15,000 people, but when 5,000 people in our population are having this challenge, maybe it's not the 200,000 that are happening in Austin or Houston or wherever, but it's important to us, and this is why. And so I look at those things when I'm reviewing, and I score based upon the compelling need. And I say, okay, so we've got a compelling need in this situation. It's not necessarily the most robust data we could ever have, but they're telling me what they got. They're drawing correlations with their Division of Child and Family data and their local alcohol coalition, that's the word I was looking for, and telling me there's a connection here. They're telling me, even anecdotally, what they're seeing in their courtrooms or what they're seeing in the jails, what their problem is. And that's compelling to me. Then, making sure the data is current and relevant. I really don't want to read anything that's over 10 years old. I want current data. So if you're even drawing a correlation between state data down to yours, national hotline data or Bureau of Justice Assistance statistics data, PJS data, sorry, not BJA. If you're drawing data from the UCR, I want current data. That's important to me to know that it's relevant to the current situation that you're dealing with. I want to know what's going on in your community, in your jurisdiction. I want to know what current efforts you're putting in place to try to address the problem. And if you've tried it and it's not working, I still want you to try to tell me about it, because I want to know what you've done to try to get to the place where you are. And if it's that we went and we observed another program in this state and it's working for them and they have similar demographics and we think this is a good model for us to try, tell me that. That's important data. I want to know that you're replicating a model that has promise. Tell me what your plan is, your innovation, if it's replicable, if it's based on evidence-based practices or research-based practices. If it's there and you have that information, tell me about that. Because as a reviewer, I want to know that you've done your homework, that you're not just throwing something at the wall and seeing if it sticks so you can get money. I want to know that this is really important to you. And then I give you good scores for that. And then evaluation, just like Kristen and Christina were saying, those deliverables are really important. Make sure they're achievable, that they're not overzealous and unaccomplishable. We recognize when we're looking at your budgets and we see that you have one quarter-time person that you're paying out of this grant as your project director, and they're the only one that's going to be focused on this project, I'm going to base your deliverables on the amount of time and effort that your key personnel are putting toward that project. So the correlation, like they were talking about, is key. Making sure if you're talking about activities, I want to see that you've got the people in place to do that. And if that person is not going to be paid under the grant, let's say that you've got a mental health grant and you are really just interested in making sure that they are able to get to resources. So you're paying for treatment programs out of it, or a diversion program, or some other resource for them, and that's what you need the grant funds for. And you already have the coordinator's funding secured in your operating budget. Tell me that. Let me know that we don't need personnel for this. I've got that covered, but this is what they're going to be doing. So tell me, maybe it can be match funds. If no matching is required, okay, don't list it. Don't let them commit you to something you don't have to commit to. But tell me about it in your narrative or in your budget narrative so that I clearly understand that you've got it covered. So those are my key takeaways as a reviewer perspective. Now back to the hunt. How much time do I have? Okay. And then I do want to leave a little time because if you've got questions and it's a great opportunity to take advantage of that. But here are some key takeaways to me. You're on the hunt for data. If you don't have the local data, don't hesitate to reach out to other resources that are going to have data for you. Bureau of Justice Statistics, Uniform Crime Report. If you're dealing with children, Annie E. Casey Foundation with Kids Count is going to have data. And I actually looked it up last night, it's YRBSS, and not YRRBS, but it's the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System Survey. That's local data, and it is rich data, because this is data that is surveying the kids in middle schools and high schools, asking them about their likelihood of using marijuana, tobacco, alcohol, asking them questions about their mental health. You can use that data to help justify your case. There's also the behavioral risk factor surveillance system data from the CDC, and that's driven through your health departments, so BRFIS as they call it. But I think it's every 4 years, they update that survey. But it too is really driven around, and this is all youth driven, but it's driven around youth attitudes and beliefs around sexual behavior, substance use, tobacco use, vaping is in there now. All of that information is available to you to draw in to make your case for your application. There's also legislative services. I mentioned this yesterday. So when I was working for the state coalition that I worked for, we requested data from our legislative services with the governor's office, and they were able to give us data on actual prosecution and conviction rates for every county in the state related to sex crimes. From that, we were able to, now keep in mind, remember I was on the victim side of the house at the time, but this was tying in for me. So we were able to use that data from legislative services to show that only 1 in 9 cases out of all the county statistics for sex crimes that were going before the courts ended up with an adjudication of a sex crime. They were either pled down, dismissed, but only 1 in 9 case of a sex crime ended up with a sex crimes conviction. What that did for us is get us federal funding to get training for our courts and our prosecutors and our law enforcement. It helped them, it helped us establish our sexual assault response teams. It helped get more training on checklists and questions to ask, interviewing techniques, data collection, crime scene evidence collection, a whole bunch of things that we were able to accomplish based on that data that we got from an unlikely source. So reach out, and if you don't know where to look, talk to the governor's office. Alyssa's going to have a whole host of resources. If she doesn't know it, she's probably going to help you find it. Look at your state coalitions. TASA, Texas Coalition Against Domestic Violence, Texas CASA program, all of them are going to be, one, very interested in the work that you're doing because it provides a mutually exclusive benefit for them. So if you're focused on improving response and treatment, diversion options in your courtrooms, that's going to benefit the populations that they're serving. So one, they may be great collaborators with you on an application, but two, they may also know resources for you to tap into for funding. And don't be afraid to step out of the box a little bit. So BJA, SAMHSA, they're your likely resources for a lot of your court programs and funding. But think outside of the box, right? So if you're dealing with youth, for example, who are opportunity youth and you're trying to avoid sending them to programs or incarceration, and there's an opportunity to provide resources for them or put them into job placement programs, look at things like the Department of Labor and their workforce initiatives for disadvantaged or opportunity youth. Think about the Centers for Disease Control, the weed and seed programs, right? That's all focused on community rehabilitation, violence, crime prevention, et cetera. Look outside of the box from the traditional court programs and see where you can address the need that you're wanting to address. Let's see, what else was I going to say? So I talked about FOIA websites. Oh, usaspending.gov. It's my favorite website in the whole world. There's the goob in me. All right, usaspending.gov. If you've never tapped into this resource, it's a great resource. Now, that would be the one slide I'd put up there if I had one for you. But usaspending.gov is the Treasury's portal, and it is a live update of all things federal funding. So if you know a solicitation, or let's say you know a court that really is great at getting federal dollars, they have really great programs going on, and you're like, I want to know what funding they have. And you don't just want to call them up, but you want to check it out, usaspending.gov is your source. You can go on usaspending.gov, type them in, type in the court, and it's going to pull up all of the federal funding that they currently have and have received in the past. You can click on it and you can see what they received funding for. So it gives a brief description. So if it's Justice and Mental Health Collaborative, for example, and you click on that, it's going to give you some details. Maybe it funded a behavioral health unit in their law enforcement department so that when they go on scene, they're able to provide mental health supports and behavioral interventions to avoid arrest. So maybe that's what they were able to support with their Justice and Mental Health Collaborative. But use usaspending.gov. And then if you really like it, you're like, God, I really want to read their application, do a FOIA request. And then get their solicitation so that you can read it. If you know them, it's great to call them and just see if they're willing to share. Because a lot of times, if they are already funded and they're not competing against you for dollars, a lot of times entities are willing to share their information with you on what was successful. The other comment that I have, certainly if you are not successful, I can't echo any more than what they've already said, ask for the reviewer comments. Pay attention to where those weaknesses were and use that to strengthen your application next time. And I think the last thing I wanted to tell you was, two more things. Two more things. Quickly, environmental justice, equity and inclusion, big hot topic things right now, right? So the Resource Center here has a map. They've got a lot of great information. You can also, strangely enough, use the Environmental Protection Agency. They have an environmental justice screening tool. It's a nationwide map. Click on your locale, and it brings up all the environmental justice issues. It's a great resource. And think about equity and inclusion and how your program is meaningfully engaging in equity and inclusion. If you don't know and you're not there yet, talk about that too, and talk about the strategies that you're going to take to address equity and inclusion. And my last thing, when you're applying for federal funding, make sure to let your congressional representative know that you've applied for funding. It doesn't ever hurt. So we have like 5 minutes left. So I'll sit, and the resources that I have, I'll put back on the table that we have over there. Thank you for your time. It's been great. And if you have any questions.